All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about today's top story. Let's talk about the United States and what the United States is doing to take things a little too far with China as we enter potential war with China. And the battle over Taiwan could be coming very, very soon. We're going to cover that. We're going to talk about Vladimir Putin meeting with Xi Jinping, also the Iranian president in Uzbekistan, President Vladimir Putin just landing a short time ago and starting those meetings this afternoon. But something really strange, first of all, happened overnight. We want to address it because a number of you sent emails saying, have you seen this news about Putin? And I want to address it here, give you some updates on reports of an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. The report said that an explosion had rocked the cars in his motorcade while at the same time, simultaneously, or maybe a few hours apart, the motorcade for Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine was also hit by an automobile that drove straight into his car that he was driving.
Well, reports are that it hit his car and his entourage. So multiple cars were hit and the other passenger was hospitalized. Right.
And Zelensky had to be taken also by ambulance to the hospital just to be checked, which is crazy. So what the hell is going on here? I mean, a potential assassination attempt on the motorcade, but I want to kind of get into that piece of this in a second. But we know that...
I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was the other driver, the person who hit the motorcade of Zelensky, was hospitalized and still remains. They have not said if there was any sort of nefarious foul play, but they said they will investigate.
Yeah. So we know that Zelensky was also hurt. Maybe just like cuts and bruises, scratch or whatever, and then taken to the hospital. But he is okay. He was in the town of Izium for a flag raising ceremony. The town was recently recaptured from Russia. He was on his way back to Kiev when this car smashed into his motorcade. Now, if you've ever seen a motorcade before, especially one that's like heavily armored and protected by NATO forces, it's very odd that a car would have access to be able to do something like that. They block intersections. They block overpasses, they block underpasses, they block all of that stuff.
Usually intersections are cleared well in advance, right? Yeah. We know we used to live near the Florham Park Airport where Trump flew into all the time because he went to his Bedminster Club while he was president. And they would regularly close not just the roadways that he would travel, but the overpasses and the intersections.
Right. And we've seen these motorcades. I mean, we've been covering them, even the motorcade going to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, right? And the motorcade of the IAEA inspectors. We know that along that route, there were all sorts of protections made on that route at different intersections and overpasses to make sure that IAEA inspection group, the motorcade, made it there safely.
Yes.
So again, very odd that a car is able to make it through. Now, this was an area that's hotly contested. I mean, this is this is right up against Russia's border, right? This is very, very close. This is obviously a hotly contested area that's been they've been attacking for 8 solid years now. So it's not like there's people out there with flags waving that everyone's excited to see Zelensky rolling through. So anyway, we'll get more on this. He was able to do an address a little bit later that evening to the people of Ukraine. So he appeared to be fine, but he was put in an ambulance. The other side of it, though, is the Putin story, which is really strange, of course. That story comes on the heels of a number of health-related bullshit stories that we've seen that says he's dying of cancer, that there's about to be a coup, right, that all of his inner circle are going to overthrow him. I love these stories. Like, where do these stories even come from?
Yeah.
And now reports last night of an assassination attempt, that an explosion was heard near his motorcade, that he was uninjured. The original report came from an anti-Putin Telegram channel, so it's very important to point that out. It came from an anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin Telegram channel, and then it was later followed up by a number of news reports that followed the story. So it started there and then went to other news outlets. They said Putin was okay. The whole thing, though, seems really fishy to me. I have to say, on the Putin side, it does seem really fishy.
Both sides seem fishy.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're both fishy. They're both oddly timed, but the Putin one particularly is like, is there any truth to it other than maybe it was a car tire or a car backfiring nearby?
The way the Mirror, right, which is the British
tabloid.
Yes.
Yes.
The way they covered it was, well, this happened, and then sort of heads rolled inside his security.
Like they were all fired, it said.
Right, because someone
know?
got access to it, right? And sources say...
I mean, he's such a close-knit group, and the idea that he's dying of cancer, right? I love those stories, that he's ill. Does he look ill to you? I mean, I don't know. There's going to be a coup attempt. Everyone's going to overthrow him. Okay, where are you getting this info? Are you plugged into the Kremlin, the Mirror online from Britain? Okay.
Well, he felt well enough to take a trip today.
Yeah, so anyway, it was, he landed. After that, he flew to Uzbekistan this afternoon. Just a few hours ago, Russian President Putin landed in Uzbekistan. There he is being welcomed on the tarmac there, big to-do. They had a big flat screen television outside welcoming him for this big event. This, of course, is a big conference that they're meeting with, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He's going to be meeting with world leaders that have nothing to do with Joe Biden, nothing to do with Justin Trudeau or Ursula von der Leyen. Instead, Putin's going to be meeting with Iranian President Russi. He met with him today, actually. Chinese President Xi Jinping later this afternoon. And all of this comes at an interesting time as the United States, the deep state inside the United States, is getting closer to starting a war with China. The United States deep state desperately wants a war with China. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But first, some context around these meetings. A few weeks ago, President Vladimir Putin reorganized some of his government, and didn't get much press at all. It wasn't really covered anywhere. We didn't really talk about it on our show at the time, and quite frankly, the Western media largely ignored the story. But it's incredibly important, and what it shows is that Vladimir Putin is actively restructuring the government to be more self-sufficient and self-reliant. Think about that for a second, right? Or a country like Russia can say, okay, all right, since 2014, you've had these sanctions in place against us. They've ramped up over the past year now. We have been putting things in place to make sure that our manufacturing and industrial power is strong, that we are self-reliant. And okay, if that's the way you want to play it, bye-bye. We're going to make new alliances and make sure that we're taken care of.
Yeah. Less dependent on foreign imports, which is what a lot of countries gave lip service to after the pandemic.
Right.
Very few have done anything resembling that.
Lip service is a good way to put it, because we hear this all the time from American political candidates.
Yes.
We hear this from EU candidate or
well,
EU
here
politician.
in Portugal, we heard it from Antonio Costa, right? So yes, this is something most people champion and very few make any headway on.
So he restructured a huge portion of his government. He gave promotions to a couple of people, a couple of big players inside of the Russian government, and doubling down on his relationship with China, with Saudi Arabia, with India, with Iran and Brazil. Recently, he made some promotions. Putin promoted some guys who have really built up Russia's manufacturing inside of Russia. Imagine that a country that produces its own things. One of the guys that Putin promoted, his name is Montarov. He's been traveling around inside Russia, going to different industrial hubs, meeting with different manufacturers of all sorts, making sure that they have the supplies that they need, making sure that everything is moving smoothly inside of Russia. He's been going to multiple manufacturing and industrial hubs all through Russia. Think about that. Can the same thing be said in the United States? We don't make anything. Like, where are you going to go? I mean, you're going to go to you're going to go to Indiana and go to the Carrier plant? No, because you know why? They moved to, where did they move? They moved to Mexico. Like, where are you going to go? You're not going to go anywhere. It's unbelievable, actually, when you think about it, right? They manufacture everything. All the stuff that they need is pretty much manufactured there.
And mined there. The raw materials are also mined there.
Great point, right? So they have both the minerals and the manufacturing and the power to produce on their own, which is really stunning. Again, so when they went into this full-scale production since 2014, a lot of these guys inside the Putin government they weren't politics guys. They were straightforward, like under the Putin regime. They've gotten promoted now. Putin in the past few weeks has promoted some of these guys who've really built up the manufacturing and industrial. We don't build anything in the United States. So the deep state is really aiming towards a war with China, to start a war with China because of this very issue. Because of the American hegemony, the lack of industrial power, and the rising of China. We've talked about on the show, China is set to become the world superpower by 2030, I think is the number, by 2030. So don't believe it me. Like, look what happened last night in the United States Senate. President Putin and Xi Jinping fly to Uzbekistan, and on the same day they're flying there, this happens in the United States Senate last night. There was a bipartisan support that passed the bill without any dissent, basically. It's a major change to the U.S. position towards Taiwan, and it will funnel billions of dollars in military support to Taiwan. Here's how it reads. I'll read the Dave DeCamp version of this on antiwar.com. Senate panel advances bill that would radically change U.S. Taiwan policy. The Senate Armed Services Committee approved a bill on Wednesday that would radically alter the policy towards Taiwan and significantly escalate tensions with Beijing. The amended version of the Taiwan Policy Act would give Taiwan $6 billion in military aid, give the island the benefits of being a major non-NATO ally, expedite arms sales to Taipei, and require sanctions in the event of Chinese aggression. So, I mean, this is amazing. If the legislation makes it through Congress and it's signed by President Biden, it will be a major overhaul of U.S. policy towards China and Taiwan.
Yes, you think?
Yes, which was defined by the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act. Since 1979, the U.S. hasn't had any formal diplomatic relations with Taipei and China. And they're basically moving away from this towards a major provocation with China.
I mean, it can be quiet to us, but it's certainly not quiet to China. They will notice this, and it will be a topic of conversation in these meetings of what the United States considers adversaries.
Well, yeah, and they're saying, look, this is a major escalation. So, I mean, this is what China is seeing this as. China's basically saying the current U.S. policy this is a knowingly engaged in a significant escalation in aggression, they say.
Yes.
That's exactly what this would say. Senator Rand Paul was one of the few who actually voted against it. He told Politico, this is not a time to radically change long-standing policy without an appreciation of the consequences that may follow, Rand Paul said. So all of this is meant to provoke a war with China. The United States deep state desperately wants a war with China for one very important reason: world dominance.
But by all accounts, the United States couldn't win a war like that.
Right.
And so the calculation is not necessarily to win, it's to weaken. To weaken,
to drive down their speed with which they will reach their industrial
with dominance. American lives, though. Like, we will go in and sacrifice lives of Americans in order to weaken this superpower. And that is, by some, an acceptable calculation of lives.
Because China will become, see, the thing is, what people don't understand is China doesn't want a war, and they don't have to do this. China is going to become the world superpower in just a few years without firing a bullet because of their industrial power, and the United States is collapsing. And so you see this relationship with Putin and Russia and China and Iran and Brazil, and they're doing it without firing a bullet. The way that the United States has two strengths: the U.S. dollar and the U.S. military,
and exportation of culture.
Yeah, but is that really? I mean,
I think that there's a currency of
that collapses, though.
It does, but it holds a lot of water. When you see people who sort of champion the United States, if for no other reason than because they like American culture.
Yeah, but without American military might and without the strength of the U.S. dollar, that declines.
I would just say it contributes to the cap rate, if you will.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah, maybe it's like icing on the cake of like what it means to support an America. I don't know.
It's a measure of goodwill internationally. I mean, I think that it may, however misplaced by some.
So the deep state in the United States is not going to sit by and watch the U.S. dollar collapse, and they are also not going to sit by and watch China rise to the world's economic superpower. That means a replacement of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And it is a dominant position. Also, China is ramping up its nuclear weapon production, not because it wants to use them, but because it gets them a seat at the table. You know, Russia has 6,000 nuclear warheads, right? Mm-hmm. Their weapons now, China's weapons, we've had a number of weapons experts here on the show talk about China's like hypersonic missiles and other weapons that the United States can't touch. The United States has really strong nuclear submarines, but we'd have to travel, as General McGregor said, you'd have to travel thousands of miles to attack China, and they can absorb anything that we throw at them. thousands of miles away to attack them in the Taiwan Strait. So this is a clear provocation of trying to keep China down, to try to weaken them or slow their move towards dominant superpower.
Yeah.
So this battle of Taiwan, this coming war, this is where all focus should be. We've said all along that what's going on in Ukraine is just I don't know, it's like the preamble to all of this. It's important to understand that China is not interested at war with the United States at all. For one very important reason, China is already set to win. They've already set to become the global superpower. So for them to enter a war with the United States, it slows that process down. It slows their speed to dominance down. If they have to now be fighting us in the Taiwan Strait, if they have to be fighting us other places, they don't want to have to do that. That would be a distraction. Think about it. They've been working, trying to complete their Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
And this would slow that down dramatically. Rail lines, shipping lines in the South Pacific, rail lines and roadways and bridges all through Europe and Asia would be totally slowed down.
And not to mention, it would really shoot the United States in the foot because so much of American consumption is from China.
Right. So just to wrap this up, I want to point you to a Russi report. Now, Russi, R-U-S-I, is basically the British version of the Rand Corporation. Fascinating reports. You should read them from time to time because if for nothing else than to see it's a think tank. And they're studying deeply like what is happening in these regions. Russi published an amazing report on Ukraine. And what it showed was Russia has immense industrial capacity and the United States doesn't. And it showed that America is losing the industrial war. And so all of the ammunition that Russia is firing, it takes them about 1 month to produce. It would take the United States 3 years to produce the amount of ammunition that Russia is firing within 1 month. And you remember President Biden had to fly to Alabama and meet with Raytheon to try to get them to ramp up production on weapons.
Yes, and use the Emergency Authorization Act in order to get them raw material first before consumers.
Right. That's true. I forgot about that piece of it. So having to pull a rabbit out of a hat, basically.
Yes.
Well, no, Russia already has that infrastructure, already has that manufacturing infrastructure. So all of this to say that the industrial war is the first piece to fall, and the United States is losing the industrial war piece of this. A number of indicators we've been talking about this all summer, frankly, how the United States is having to ramp up production on this. And a lot of the weapons that they've been sending to Russia have been arguably failing, and mothballed old weapons that where batteries don't even work. So the industrial capacity of the United States compared to this alliance with Russia and China is damning. So China responded to this move about increasing ties to Taiwan. This was what the Chinese ambassador, warning that increasing U.S. ties with Taiwan could lead to war. So where does this all point to? It does. It leads to war. China's ambassador to the U.S. warned that Washington's increasing support for Taiwan could ultimately lead to a war with the U.S. and China. He said, it's emboldening independence forces in Taiwan. If the Taiwanese authorities, emboldened by the United States, keep going down the road for independence, it most likely will involve China and the United States, the two big countries, in the military conflict. And the death, at the end of the day, the death of the U.S. Hegemony.
I think this is important to remember, especially if you are someone who has a child who can be drafted, or you could be drafted yourself into a conflict like this, to ask yourself, do I think it is worth anybody's life to go just to bring down another country who is sort of keeping its eye on its own paper, right? Manufacturing, building things, selling things, making things. And China is by no means perfect, right? But would I give the life of my child just to weaken a competitor? No. Right? This is not an acceptable risk. And when inevitably we are dragged into a conflict like this, we have to think whatever they're going to tell us, right? About the Uyghurs or whatever else. Yeah. Is it worth the lives of the people I love? I'm going to preemptively say no.
No. And, it's also important to point out that the White House was upset or not on board fully with this legislation that the Senate was trying to pass and that did pass. So to me, it's clear that it is the United States deep state that wants this.
Yes.
The military-industrial complex. It is the people. Biden's just a puppet, right? And so if the White House is hesitant because they know this could lead, he's only there for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 8 if he somehow miraculously wins a re-election, right? But they know that these elected politicians are gone, and it's those deep state actors in the intelligence community, at the Federal Reserve, and at the military-industrial complex that want this war.
It brings to mind a piece that I watched on Rachel Maddow about 3 years ago during the Trump administration. That's her extrapolation was that Russia's military gear was so old and jank, right?
That's what she was saying.
This is what she was saying, that they want to control Trump in order to boost their international reputation and make us think they're awesome, because they're not awesome. They're really all rusty and broken down, right? This was absolutely her narrative.
It's hilarious. Now it's the exact opposite.
Right.
We're actually seeing the exact opposite. And you know what's funny about that is that Russia didn't respond to that propaganda and BS.
Yes.
They're like, oh, fine. That's great. You want to believe that our stuff is old and rusty and jank?
She put a ship on the screen, was like, look, this ship is old and jank. It's the jalopy of warships. That's what they got, right? And me as an audience, I don't know what they've got, right? I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting, right?
Right.
The data doesn't seem to support that, but this is what people who are left-leaning are being told. We're much better than them. We absolutely could take them in a fight, right? It's this my dad can beat up your dad type of thing. And, don't worry about it. We got it taken care of, Harry.
We got it taken care of, Harry.
Right?
Come on.
Totally redeem yourself.
Our pets' heads are falling off.
Those are Dumb and Dumber lines.
Yes.
Did you catch those, Philip?
Yes, I hope so. What the hell are they talking?
Okay.
I did not. No, sorry. My audio was off. I did not catch that. No.
We have such a big international audience that I don't know how many people would know that.
We'd catch our little movie quips. Okay.
But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and the coming war with China. Again, this is not propaganda. We're seeing it in action, folks. So let us know your thoughts on this in the chat below in the comments section.